Welcome to the Test Guild Automation Podcast, where we all get together to learn more about automation and software testing, with your host, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Today we'll be talking with Bill all about smart data testing for big data and also all types of automation topics. Bill has been around for a long time. He founded the software and services firm RTTS, a premium pure play QA and testing organization in 1996. He also, under Bill's guidance, RTTS has really successfully consulted hundreds of different engagements of projects over 700 plus corporations, from global to mid-size to small. So Bill really has a high level view of all the different things that different companies are struggling with in testing and automation. And he's also the leader of the Query Surge RTTS Enterprise Data Validation tool that helps you with ETL testing, a bunch of big data testing. And it's a unique solution that we don't speak a lot about, but I know there's a great need for. So I'm really excited to have Bill on the show to dive in all about it. So you don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. The Test Guild Automation Podcast is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs, the cloud-based test platform that helps ensure you can develop with confidence at every step, from code to deployment, for every framework, browser, OS, mobile device, and API. Get a free trial. Visit testguild.com/Sauce Labs and click on the exclusive sponsors section to try it for free today. Check it out. Hey, Bill, welcome to the Guild.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you. As I mentioned, really excited to have you on the show. But before we get into it, is there anything I missed in your bio that you want the Guild to know more about?
No, that's pretty much it. I think you pretty much said I'm an old guy. I am. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I think the bio's fine.
I guess you calling yourself an old guy makes me an old guy as well, because I think we started almost the same exact time. You started in 1996. Yep. So just curious to know, I'm always love to know what people have seen at the beginning of their career and what they're seeing now with automation and testing. Have you seen an evolution, or where were we before when you started, and where do you see us now? Has anything changed? Is anything different?
Everything's changed, right?
That type of thing.
Everything's changed and nothing's changed. So
right, exactly. Yes.
I started out using SQA Robot in 1994 on a big bank, and then started RTTS in 1996. We used SQA for about 4 years, and then decided to open up our viewpoint and started supporting Mercury Interactive in 2000, and then CompuWare, and then later on the Mercury tools. So when I started, it was Mercury, SQA, Segway, and CompuWare, as you know, Mercury being the market leader. And then in 2003, IBM bought Rational, who had already owned SQA. 2006, HP buys Mercury, Micro Focus buys CompuWare and Segway's tools, and Microsoft enters the game in 2005, and now we have Tricentis SmartPair, a bunch of smaller players in fragmented markets and open source. So seen a lot over the years, as you have, from functional automation, performance testing. Then I remember when the security tools popped in, Spy Dynamics, AppScan, HP bought Spy, IBM bought AppScan, and then service virtualization, and just rolling out more and more functionality as the target platforms changed and grew in complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. People might not like this. It was almost easier back then, because when I used Mercury products, I had an end-to-end solution. They all integrated with one another. I had my performance tests. I had test director, WinRunner,
yep.
All this awesome stuff. But now with the open source solutions, it seems like now people are trying to find a framework where you could plug all the open source solutions into a place to have that same type of functionality. When you talk, you've done a lot of different consulting in different companies. Do you see that as being an issue? Or what do you see being an issue now with open source tools? A lot of people think, it's open source, it's free, no issues, no overhead. Is that truly the...
Well, obviously, with some of the open source tools, they don't have all the functionality of a commercial enterprise solution. That's one of the things. The other is one of the things we're noticing now as we bid on deals is we're writing these really complex RFIs or RFPs that are all around security. So first it used to be, are you going to stick this tool somewhere? Is it going to touch our data? Is it going to, and now it's like the tools you're using, whether it be open source or custom utilities or our software, after SolarWinds, it's like, do you have a Trojan horse? We're answering one right now that's 392 questions. So open source kind of falls in that also because it's not an enterprise tool that's been vetted by someone's security team. And this is not going away. It's getting worse. So now it becomes more and more of, an issue getting tools into these different architectures, especially if they're going on-prem or in their cloud. If they're on your environment, it's a little bit easier, but otherwise, the open source could be a problem.
So that's interesting. So you see, I always see vendor tools tend to fit better into enterprise companies, but because of security, I would think everyone would be kind of terrified by having an exploit or something.
Yeah.
So did you see then it's a hard to sell now for open source tools, or do you see normally that companies are more open now to maybe a vendor-based tool that may be certified to not be have a vulnerability baked into it or something?
I think very many of the developers and programmers and developers and testers are totally into open source, but it's the security team which is the gatekeeper. So they're going to have an issue with almost anything you introduce into their environment now. I don't know if some of the other people you've spoken with have mentioned this, but it's a big issue now when you're bidding on jobs.
That is interesting. I've been trying to push a security podcast and security testing for a few years now, and it's really, really been difficult. And I just think testers need to get involved because it's not only is it compliance a hot topic, but even security testing in general is so hot, such a great skill to have. I don't know why it's so hard to get people interested in it. I don't know. Are you seeing that as well, or testers just like, it's out of my domain?
Again, back when Spy Dynamics and AppScan and those guys were competing against each other, once they became mainstream with HP and IBM, I thought we'd see a much bigger push on the testing side because, they're basically application security testing and it fell into the domain of the testers, but we never saw like wide scale adaptability of those tools. We've actually gone to an open source tool called OWASP Zap, which is pretty good. But we don't have a lot of expertise in it. We have like two guys that know how to use it. Because again, our customers aren't demanding it. Even if we mention it, they're like, it's not part of the testing team.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. And I know like at RTTS, you've done a lot of different implementations. One of them is application security testing. So out of all the different buckets, what do you have the most demand for then? Is the automation testing, the performance testing, mobile application testing? You do all this. What seems to be your most in-demand type of service, I guess?
Well, two. It's the functional test automation and then the space we moved in called automated data validation ETL testing. So those are the two biggest ones we see. We saw performance testing drop quite a bit because a lot of it's been commoditized. Everybody does it. They think, it's not really a skill. When you talk with a lot of business people, they think it's fairly straightforward and easy to do. But we know that that's
really?
not the case. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Wow, that's a switch.
But we've seen performance testing used to be about a third of our overall revenue, and now it's dropped to like a tenth.
I could see that because once again, I have multiple online events. I tried running a perf guild every year, and it just doesn't have the amount of people that would join an automation conference. So It's interesting you say that. So I rebranded as software reliability engineering as well, because that seems to be performance testing seems almost to be rebranded almost as SRE. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
no, it makes sense.
Kind of interesting, yeah. So you did mention something that's interesting, and it's data automation or automation testing of big data or BI reporting. It is a trend I hardly hear of on my podcast, but I know a lot of people struggle with. So I guess before we get into it, like what is that? What is ETL testing? What kind of testing are you talking about when you say data test?
So when companies are moving data from all their different sources to their data warehouse, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, basically what they do is they use what's called an ETL tool, extract, transform, and load. And what that tool will do, and there's there's a position called ETL developers, and they'll use the mapping document, mapping requirements, which are like functional requirements for data, saying, okay, you right now in our sources, first name and last name are in the same field. In our target, we're going to split them into two different fields. That would be a mapping requirement. So what they'll do is they'll either extract and load, if it's just a migration of data. We're going to take this table here and put it into our new data warehouse. Or if they're going to do some kind of transformation, whether it be splitting up fields or aggregating numbers, they'll do that and then put it in. So now this is the data store that your BI and analytics tools are sitting on top of, that your C-level people are using to make executive decisions. So if that data is mucked up, if it's inaccurate, or there's rows missing, there's a problem there. If McDonald's is basing a new hamburger with jalapenos on it in the Southwest based on numbers that they got, and those numbers are wrong, their bet's going to be off by a couple $1 million. So what data validation ETL testing makes sure of is that, think of it as functional testing for data. You're basically, with a combination of performance, you're basically chasing the data from your sources through the transformation, if there is any, into the target data warehouses, and validating that the data is okay. It made it there correctly. Now, one of the interesting things that Gartner put out is that the average company has about 100 different data sources that go into one data warehouse. Now, how many data warehouses or big data lakes like Hadoop or NoSQL that some of these big companies have, we have no idea, but we know they don't have one, they don't have two, they have 30, 40, 50 data warehouses or big data lakes. So there's a lot of data moving in, and it's growing exponentially.
So when we talk about performance testing or security testing, a lot of times people don't think it fits in the tester role. Do you think there's a lot of need for this, but a lot of people don't have it because they don't know where it fits within the software development lifecycle? Or do you normally see testers that this is part of their statement of work, is that they always focusing on data?
That's what we didn't know when we actually launched back in 2012. Probably 2006, we got an assignment at a large pharma, and they said, we're trying to use Windrunner, go back to 2006, to do data validation. So we were like, well, what's data validation? We didn't really know. So they said, we're moving data from source files and mainframe over to a new data warehouse, and we want to make sure that the data moves over correctly. Well, Windrunner wasn't architected for that. So our guys built a Java utility that did this. And over time, they built it to a more scalable Java utility. And, then we decided to take a look at the market. And that's when we realized that there's a ton of people out there in the marketplace that are doing data testing. But what they're really doing is they look at their source, they look at their target, they use a SQL tool like Toad or Squirrel or whatever tool they use, and they pull the data out and dump them into two Excel files, and they put them on two monitors, and the testers look through two spreadsheets for one test that could have 1 million rows and, at the time, 1 million rows and 200 columns. So imagine going on two different monitors, going left, right, across and down, looking for data anomalies in 1 million rows. Now we see billion rows for one test, and there could be 15,000 of these. So what we realized is people were doing it, but they were doing it what we would call manually. It wasn't really manual. They were automating it, but dumping it into Excel and hoping that they could find stuff, and they couldn't. So this is where we got the idea. Well, we were not first to market. The Informatica was already there, and there were some other players.
Nice. So do people usually contact you and say, hey, look, we have all this data and we need to somehow validate it?
Yes.
Can you help us? Or that's how it works?
Yeah. So we basically built two sites because this became such a big part of our business that we built a site specifically for data validation and ETL testing. And as the whole Hadoop thing exploded and everybody wanted to get into Hadoop, they realized that there's a lot of problems with their data. And that's how they, tripped across us, and Tricentis does it, and Informatica and others. And there's probably 12 other smaller players. And then there's a lot of the big SIs have frameworks that also do this. So it's a big movement right now, and it's kind of getting wrapped up in the whole data ops movement, which is that we call DevOps for data, which is, again, the same movement that's going on in the application development space, which is how do I get quality at speed? And the way you get quality at speed is you remove human intervention and you try to not make testing become a bottleneck. You make testing become fully automated so that the code that's being used can make smart decisions on whether to promote something. Well, it's the same in the data space also. So that's been a big movement. We're seeing on both the functional automation side and on the data testing side as being DevOps. DevOps for data, DevOps for applications. Really hot right now.
Where do you see the most demand for this? Because a lot of times I think when I data now, I think of AI, machine learning, even more data. Does this have any overlap with AI, machine learning, or is this some other data?
Well, the AI machine learning hasn't hit this realm yet as it has like functional automation, but it's getting there. But it definitely plays in every industry. Our top industries happen to be financial services, insurance, pharmaceutical, but consumer goods, as I mentioned, like at hamburger places, there's tons of, think who's really using a lot of BI and analytics. You go on, you're an old guy like me, so you probably don't use TikTok. You're probably on Facebook. And the weird thing you're going to find out is you go on Facebook or you go on any retail site. If you've done some searches on Google and then go over there, all of a sudden, things that you were searching on start popping up. Well, the retailers are really, really big into data and analytics. So they're also a big candidate. And some of the bigger retailers are using this kind of software to make sure their data is accurate. Again, if you're betting everything on the information you're looking at in your BI and analytics solutions, that data better be accurate underneath that. Otherwise, what are you doing, right?
Absolutely. So, we touched on the importance of testing data within business intelligence, reporting testing. I think we touched on ETL testing. Mm-hmm. You mentioned DevOps, continuous testing. Can you explain that a little bit more? Is that when, I guess, every quarter or every hour, is someone congesting data from all these different sources? And so as part of your pipeline, you're just continually validating it?
Yep, that's exactly what will happen. So say you have a solution like Informatica Power Center, which is one of the big ETL tools out there. So you're going to be promoting this data streaming in from everywhere, as we all know, from your website, from various other sources. Like I said, Gartner said the average company has about 100 data sources into their data warehouse. If it's continuously coming in, and if the ETL tool is continuously processing this data and pumping it into a staging area, obviously you don't put it right at the prod, hopefully, then you would automatically launch a tool like this, which would automatically validate and test all your data and tell you whether you should promote it to the next phase, which may be prod or not, or whether you should roll back and take a look at this ETL process. And now sometimes it's an ETL process, could be something like Jenkins, which is a build process, could be anything, but it's automated. It's part of the pipeline. Yes, it's part of the continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous testing pipeline that is part of making sure that all this goes on. Especially with the amount of data, which is growing, like I said, IBM says 98% of the world's data has been produced in the last 2 years, and it's growing even faster now. If this is going on all the time, you have to test it all the time. You can't wait for the testers to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning to do it, or even if they're worldwide, it just doesn't work. So it's becoming really, really big, DevOps for data.
It's worked for a company, and we used to get data drops like at a certain time at midnight, and when you come in, you had to make sure the data was all correct. It was imported correctly and everything was working correctly.
Right. Think of that at the petabyte stage.
Yeah. Now I couldn't wrap my head around it. So where does that fit in when someone's doing functional testing? Does like an automated test, like with Selenium or whatever tool, ever integrate with Query Surge, or is Query Surge just a different tool that's used at a different step within the pipeline? Do they ever integrate one another?
They can. So let's say you're using a tool like SAP, right? So you're customizing it, and you're functionally testing it, plus you're getting data feeds, and it's all part of the whole quality process. I mean, you won't use Selenium to kick off Query Surge because one's playing at the interface level and the other one's playing at the data level, but they could be running in the same testing environment or same testing time through the same group. So yeah, it's another think of Selenium playing at the top level and a data testing solution playing at the bottom level.
Nice. So I guess another trend I've been hearing a lot of for some reason is an uptick in ERP testing, and ERP testing from a functional. But I would think that ERP testing, because you mentioned ERP testing, also it was basically made with data in the background. So is that something you see as a use case for query search as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of our use cases. So ERP or any kind of enterprise application testing, whether it be a financial trading system or anything, but definitely the ERPs like the old PeopleSoft, like SAP or even Salesforce. All that, again, if you're making bets on your data, you got to make sure the data is accurate. And regardless of whether it's an ERP system or a trading system or a pharma or anything else, data's coming in from all these feeds, mainframes, your website, external vendors, internal applications, feeding into, especially we once tested PeopleSoft. It had 83 separate feeds in from just internal systems, and it had like 5 feeds from external systems. How do you know that the developers have all that data coming in and it's accurate? Again, especially when you're doing like something like PeopleSoft where it ends up being payroll. What happens, Joe, if they cut your check and it's got too many zeros in it? Well, that's probably a good thing, but but
absolutely.
But if you have one less, then it's not a good thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking if you're doing any type of research, like healthcare and things like that, your data has to be spot on, for sure. So, since you've been doing this for many years, is there anything people could do to help make it so the data is more reliable? Is it just because of all the integrations, all the way people always changing the code? It's just the nature of development that you need to have a tool in place to do the validation because something's eventually going to get mucked up.
I mean, it's the nature of the beast. I mean, something's going to get mucked up. Obviously, again, all these different points, all these different sources are coming in. Typically, you'll see that let's go back to the PeopleSoft example I gave. A lot of those feeds were owned by development teams that were focused on where those feeds were coming from. They were writing custom code to do this, but they knew that there was never any testing really going on. So they would do some sampling because, again, the data sizes were so large. They were just hoping that they would catch whatever happens. They'll be real happy when you come in with a tool and go, hey, this particular column seems to always be messed up. Can you check in the ETL code? They fix it. They're real happy now. All of a sudden, you've cleaned up their data. So there's not a lot you can do without using some kind of data quality tool. Shift to the left as far as you can to validate the data.
So we're talking about large amounts of data here at some point. So with the tool like query search, do you actually validate every piece of data? Is it just, are you doing sampling about with the AI machine learning type slant where, statistically you know what the bell curve is of what it's going to turn out to be?
That's a good question. So the way I like to phrase it is a typical data warehouse box will be not one machine, but it'll be like some kind of 20 servers with 4 core CPUs on each one, totaling petabytes of memory. And they'll put query search on a server with 32 gigs of RAM and quad core. So how can we test all the data that they have in these massive, rack of pizza boxes with one little server? So the answer is no, you can't test everything. But what you can do is test every mapping. So think about it from a functional requirements perspective, right? So in a functional requirement, you could test every requirement, but you might not test every different permutation of that requirement to make sure it's there. It's kind of like that on the data side. You can test what they call mappings, which are like data requirements. Again, this data is going to go into these fields, and it's either going to be aggregated or it's going to be exactly the way it is, or it's going to be split, or it's however you're going to do it, or it's going to be totals and sums. You can follow each one of those and test them and test every mapping to make sure that all the mappings are correct. Can you test every data? Probably not unless you built a system exactly the same size as your data warehouse or big data system. So now here's where, And you pointed at this a little bit. Here's where your machine learning and AI will start coming into play here. How do you guess which mappings and which data in those mappings, how many you need to give you 100% confidence you pretty much have closed the gap on any data issues? That's where we see it going.
Absolutely. So would you be baking that in? Actually, before we get into that, we mentioned query surge a few times. I don't think we actually really officially went over what is query surge. So what exactly is query surge? And then we'll dive into a little bit more about some maybe features that it can help folks with.
Right. So Query Surge is our enterprise application that was built off that utility that I talked about at that pharma that we developed. We launched at Oracle Open World in 2012. We now have almost 200 corporate customers in 40 different countries. What Query Surge will do is automate ETL testing or big data testing, which is NoSQL or Hadoop data stores, BI report testing. It does data migrations. It does full DevOps compatibility, and it does your ERP and enterprise applications. So it automates the process for all the testers listing, very similar to Selenium automating functional. It just has a concept of 2 points, source and target. So it's going to look at the source and it's going to look at the target and it's going to do a compare. Now we have wizards that can, if it's a migration, and there's no transformation at all, and you're just moving either columns or full tables from source to target, you could just point them at it and visually test the whole thing, and you're done. But for the most part, that's not the way it works. For the most part, there's transformations. When the transformation logic gets in there, then you have to write some SQL to make it work.
I was going to say, how hard is it to get up and running? I know sometimes people create Excel spreadsheets with all these crazy macros to try to get the information. It's like, what are you doing? That's insanity. So it's at some point you may have to write some SQL, but it seems like it can handle a lot of that out of the box.
Mm-hmm. It can handle probably 70% of the data, but the meat and potatoes might be the transformations. So you have to do it. How hard is it to get up and running? We have a tutorial built into it that takes about an hour to go through. So if you know SQL and you know the data world, you pretty much be up and running in an hour. If you don't know that, we had to take a step back for one of our big SI partners, and we actually built enterprise training, self-paced training, and certifications on Moodle, which is, I guess, the biggest open source education system out there. My kids actually used it in high school. So it's pretty good. So you could do total self-paced, and then we have certifications probably in a week if you've never done it before. No different than if you're a manual tester who has never done Selenium, and how long would it take you to get up to speed in Selenium? Probably a week, not counting, your coding skills. So similar.
Nice. So I would think there's a huge demand for this. Testers should definitely know how to test data, and using different tools like Query Surge could definitely help. Speaking of big data, just random thought popped in my head. Because Query Surge is running through a lot of these records, does it keep any type of statistics or analytics or bubble up any type of insights for you? Like, hey, your developers stink at, I don't know, some issue that they always tend to mess up that it analyzes. Just, I don't know. I'm just curious.
It has all kinds of reporting. So it does not only does search through every single row, every single data to do a comparison that you do to see if there's problems, but it looks for anomalies in columns too. So an analysis to see if maybe the same mistake is being made over and over again because it's in this particular column. So it does a lot of that. We have a lot of built-in reports, and it's getting more and more complicated to the point where we basically have what we call ready for analytics. So if you want to connect to it with Tableau or Microsoft Power BI and write your own stuff and your own reports, have at it.
Okay, Bill, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their big data testing efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you or learn more about Query Surge?
Right. So one of the things we've worked on is making sure that any information anyone needs is on our website. So querysurge.com, we have a free tutorial, we have free downloads. Every 3 months, we let any tester that wants to into our self-paced training and content portal so they can learn through all our self-paced courses and take the certifications for free. And then they can post them on LinkedIn. So pretty much all the information you could ever want is out there. Even pages explaining what ETL testing is and what Devops for data are and how to get started and everything. So I think we had to take a big step back and spend a lot of time making sure that all that information was out there.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A403. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try for Free Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.